The echo of a song I couldn't name lingered in my mind, like the ghost of a memory I wasn't sure was mine. The melody faded as I opened my eyes, a dull ache pulsing behind them. Darkness pressed against the edges of my vision, but it wasn't the soft darkness of sleep. It was cold and sharp, like the kind that swallows light and promises no return. I sat up, my body stiff and reluctant, and I looked around. Trees stretched upward into a twilight canopy, their blackened branches clawing at the sky. The air hung heavy, damp with a silence that felt wrong. Too thick, too still. I couldn't tell if it was early morning or dusk, but something about the light, or the lack of it, seemed unnatural, as though the world itself had forgotten what time was supposed to be. I didn't remember how I got here. My head felt fractured, pieces of memory scattered like shards of glass. A crash of water, hands pulling, a voice soft and close, whispering words I couldn't hold on to. And now, the forest. I got to my feet, each movement cautious, my limbs protesting with the kind of soreness that came from a struggle. The forest floor beneath me was soft, spongy, as though the earth had absorbed too much rain. The smell of damp wood and decay clung to the air, filling my lungs with every hesitant breath. I turned slowly, taking in my surroundings, trees in every direction. No trail, no road, no sign of where I'd come from or where I was supposed to go. Just an endless, suffocating wilderness that seemed to breathe with me, as if the forest were alive in ways I couldn't see. That's when I saw it. A flicker of color between the trees, distant and faint, but unmistakable. The orange-red of rusted metal. My stomach tightened as I began to walk toward it, my legs unsteady, but driven by the kind of curiosity that's equal parts dread and desperation. As I drew closer, the shape took form, a jagged skeleton of a plane, its broken body resting crookedly among the trees. The torn metal glinted dully in the weak light, edges curled like claws, as though the wreckage itself were trying to drag something down with it. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The sight of the plane wreckage made my chest tighten, not just with fear, but with a strange sense of familiarity, like the echo of a forgotten dream. It felt wrong, impossibly so, but also inevitable, as if the wreckage had been waiting for me all along, like I'd been looking for it without knowing why. "Hey," a voice called from the wreckage, cutting through the silence like a blade. I froze, my heart stuttering. A man emerged from the shadows of the wreck, his figure tall but gaunt, the kind of thin that spoke to weeks without proper food. His clothes were torn and smeared with dirt, and his face was pale, angular, with hollowness in his eyes that I couldn't look at for long. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice calm but firm, as though we were standing in a place we both knew we shouldn't be. I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. He stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate, as though he were afraid any sudden action might shatter the fragile stillness around us. Up close he looked even worse, sunken cheeks, clothes hanging loose on his frame, and eyes that seemed to drink in too much of the dim light. "I could say the same to you," I finally managed, my voice hoarse, barely louder than the breath it rode on. He gave a small, humorless smile, glancing back at the wreckage. No one's supposed to be here, he said, almost to himself. Then his gaze snapped back to me. How did you find this place? I don't know, I admitted. I just woke up. Out there. I gestured vaguely at the trees, their shadows stretching endlessly in every direction. I don't remember how I got here. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, as though my answer made perfect sense. It happens, he said. This place, it's not kind to memory. The way he said it, with a quiet certainty, made the hair on the back of my neck rise. I wanted to press him, to demand answers, but something about his presence stilled my tongue. Instead, I looked past him, to the shattered plane. Its fuselage was cracked open like a rib cage, its insides blackened and twisted. Were there others? I asked, the words careful, tentative. No one survived, he said flatly. The finality of it hit like a physical blow. But then, after a pause, he added, well, not for long. The ambiguity in his tone left a knot in my stomach. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned away, motioning for me to follow. We shouldn't stay here, he said. The forest, it doesn't like when you linger. I hesitated, glancing at the wreckage one last time before trailing after him. His stride was quick, purposeful, like he knew exactly where he was going. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been walking this forest for far longer than he let on. The ground beneath us squelched softly with each step, the air thick with the scent of moss and rot. As we moved deeper into the forest, a faint sound began to creep into the silence. A whispering, almost too soft to hear. I stopped, straining to make it out, but the survivor pressed on without pause. Do you hear that? I asked, quickening my pace to catch up. He didn't look at me. This place plays tricks on you, he said. Sounds, shadows, memories. His voice had an edge to it now, sharper, less composed. You can't trust any of it. The whispering grew louder, though it seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once, like voices caught in a wind that didn't exist. They weren't just voices. They felt like questions, half-formed and relentless, like memories clawing to surface, guilt I didn't want to face and couldn't outrun. I turned, scanning the forest, but all I saw were trees and shadows, no movement, no source. Are you sure it's nothing? I pressed. This time he stopped, turning to face me. His eyes locked on mine, and for a moment they seemed darker than before, deeper. It's nothing, he said firmly, but the words fell hollow, rehearsed. We pressed on. The forest seemed to grow denser with every step, the trees leaning in, their branches intertwining like skeletal hands. The light faded further, and I found myself stealing glances at the man leading the way. His pace never faltered, his breathing steady, almost mechanical. Who are you? I asked, breaking the silence. How did you survive the crash? He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost distant. I don't know, he said. Sometimes I wonder if I did. Before I could ask what he meant, he stopped abruptly. I nearly walked into him. Do you feel that? He asked. His head tilted slightly, as though listening to something I couldn't hear. I strained my senses, trying to understand what he was talking about. The whispering had stopped. The air was still, oppressively so. Then, faintly, I felt it. A cold that didn't belong, brushing against my skin like the breath of something unseen. "We need to move," he said, his voice urgent now. "Quickly." The forest came alive around us as we moved. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, twisting and shifting in ways that defied logic. The air grew colder, sharper, and the whispering returned, louder now, more insistent. It sounded closer, like the voices were circling us, their fragmented murmurs threading through the trees. I stumbled over a root, catching myself against the rough bark of a tree. When I looked up, the survivor was several steps ahead, his form half obscured by the gloom. "Wait!" I called out, but he didn't stop. Something brushed against my arm, cold and fleeting, like a hand that wasn't there. A faint scent of damp earth clung to it, and my skin prickled as if touched by static, the sensation trailing long after it had passed. I turned sharply, but there was nothing. Just the forest. Just the endless, suffocating forest. I forced myself forward, my breath shallow, each step heavier than the last. The survivor didn't turn back, his figure a shadow among shadows, but his voice reached me through the dark. "Keep moving," he called, his tone flat, unyielding. "It's safer if we stay ahead of it." "What's it?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. No response. The whispering grew louder, surrounding me now, and I could swear I heard my name tangled in the murmurs. My pace quickened, desperation driving me closer to the survivor. But the whispers followed, clinging like mist. And then I saw them. Figures, pale and indistinct, half-formed silhouettes flitting between the trees. At first I thought they were tricks of the light, the shadows playing cruel games. But as I focused, they solidified, faces blurred and stretched, bodies thin and unsteady, like they were being pulled apart and pieced back together in endless, agonizing loops. One stopped just a few feet from me, its head tilted as if studying me. Its eyes, or the dark hollows where eyes should have been, pierced through the gloom. A voice, faint and broken, slipped from its mouth. "Where are we?" The sound wasn't a question. It was a fragment, a piece of something that had been lost, endlessly repeating itself in a futile search for meaning. "Keep moving," the survivor barked, snapping me back to the present. I tore my gaze from the figure and stumbled after him, the cold tightening around my chest like a vice. We didn't stop until we reached a small clearing where the trees opened to reveal the remnants of a campfire. The survivor crouched by the ashes, his back to me, his movements slow and deliberate. I stayed where I was, my legs trembling beneath me. "What were those things?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They're what's left," he said without turning. "Fragments of what used to be. They don't know they're gone." His words sank into me like stones. "Gone?" I repeated, the weight of the term almost too much to hold. He stood and faced me, his expression unreadable. "This place, it holds on to things, people, moments. It doesn't let them go, even when it should." He paused, his gaze drifting past me to something only he could see. "It keeps them here, traps them, pieces of them." I shivered, the cold now seeping into my bones. Why? Why does it do that? His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something other than detachment in his gaze. I saw sadness. Because, he said, some things refuse to end. His voice quiet, almost regretful, even when they should. The fire was long dead, but I sat beside its cold remains, tracing patterns in the ash with the tip of a stick. The survivor stood at the edge of the clearing, his back to me, unmoving. He stared out into the trees, his head tilted slightly, as though listening for something I couldn't hear. I watched him for a moment, my chest tight with questions I didn't know how to ask. The way he held himself, rigid yet calm, made him seem both present and distant, like he was caught between here and somewhere else. What happens now? I asked, breaking the silence. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the weight of the forest around us. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his tone was low, almost thoughtful. We keep moving, he said, before it catches up to us. What it? I pressed, but he didn't turn, his gaze fixed on the trees. This place, he said after a long pause, it's not what you think. The vagueness of his words unsettled me more than any direct answer could have. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but something about the way he stood there, the faint tension in his shoulders, the stillness in his breath, kept me silent. I looked down at the ashes again, feeling the cold of the forest seeping into me. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint whisper in the distance, threading through the trees like smoke. When I glanced up, the survivor was still staring into the dark, his posture unchanged. Let's go, he said abruptly, his voice cutting through the stillness. Without waiting for a response, he turned and began walking, his footsteps impossibly quiet against the forest floor. I rose unsteadily, my legs stiff from sitting too long. As I followed, the silence around us seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. And then, faintly at first, the whispers returned. They crept through the trees, threading together like a melody just out of reach, their fragmented murmurs brushing against the edges of my mind. My breath caught, shadows flickered at the edge of the clearing, too faint to focus on, but impossible to ignore. Figures had returned too, their shapes flickering on the edge of the clearing, circling, watching. The air felt colder now, sharper, as though it carried the weight of unseen eyes. Why are they following us? I asked, my voice trembling. They're not following us, he said, and this time he did turn, his eyes darker now, deeper, like they held an emptiness I couldn't understand. They're following you. I stood abruptly, my pulse hammering in my ears. What are you talking about? Why me? He stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate, like he was trying not to startle me. You woke them, he said, his voice calm but unrelenting. They can feel it on you, the fear, the questions. They're drawn to it. I took a step back, my heels scraping against the cold dirt. You're not making any sense. His expression softened, just slightly, and for a moment, he almost seemed human. None of this makes sense, he said. That's the point. The forest grew darker as we moved again, the shadows thickening like a storm gathering in the distance. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going, my legs heavy, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't answer. The survivor stayed ahead of me, his figure steady, his step certain. And then I saw it, the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to an open road. Relief surged through me, a lightness I hadn't felt since waking in this place. "We made it," I said, my voice shaky with disbelief. The survivor stopped just before the tree line, his silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the moon. He didn't move. "You're gonna be okay now," he said, his voice softer than it had been all night. I took a step forward, my breath catching. "Aren't you coming?" He turned, and the look on his face froze me in place. His features were calm, almost serene, but his eyes, they were empty, endless voids that seemed to pull at something deep inside me. "No one survived," he said again, and this time the weight of his truth sent a cold wind down my spine, chilling me to the core. My heart pounded as I turned to the road, desperate to escape. A pair of headlights pierced the darkness ahead, their beams cutting through the shadows. The car slowed as it approached, coming to a stop just beyond me, its engine idling softly in the suffocating silence. Relief surged through me, driving me forward. My legs moved faster than my thoughts, closing the distance to salvation. But as I neared, unease prickled at my skin, a cold, creeping sensation I couldn't explain. Something was wrong. Not something I could see or hear, but a sense beyond reason, an instinct that pinned me to the ground. Fear descended like a weight, rooting me in place. My breath slowed, catching in my throat. I didn't dare make a sound, though I didn't know why. The whispers stirred behind me, threading through the trees, louder now, closer. My body screamed at me to run, but I was frozen, caught between two wrongs, the forest and the car. And then, in a way that defied all sense, I saw it.